Welcome, everybody. My name is Dan Rodney, and welcome to the Noble Desktop Seminar for Getting Started in Design. Tonight, we're going to be talking about graphic design, web design, user experience design, user interface design, and motion design. So all different types of design, hopefully helping you to get a better sense of what designers do, which area you might want to go in. These are the types of things that we teach at Noble Desktop. We're based out of New York City because of everything going on now with coronavirus. Of course, we're teaching all of our classes online as well, giving this free seminar here live online to try to help you know what it is that designers do, what things you might need to learn if you're getting into design, how you approach getting started with it. And in this presentation here, which is at nobledesktop.com/presentation/get-started-in-design. For those of you who are attending live, I will paste that into the chat. We will also be recording this session, and we'll be posting it onto our blog and on our YouTube channel as well. So welcome, everybody. If you haven't been to a Noble Desktop seminar, I'm glad you could join us. If you've been to one in the past, thank you for coming back, and it's good to virtually see all of you here today. So in this slide presentation here, there's going to be lots of useful links that you can check out later. So this is meant to be some reference for you and what we can see in front of us as we're giving these concepts and some understanding. So what we're going to talk about tonight is the different types of design that you can do. We work typically digitally for these kind of things. So what kind of digital design can you do? We have graphic design, user experience design, user interface design, web design, motion design. There are other kinds of designs out there, but these are the ones that we're going to be talking about tonight. What exactly do designers do? We can take a look at some examples of their design work and also portfolios as well. What apps do designers use? This will be useful for you to know, because if you're wanting to get into a specific area of design, you will want to learn those applications so that you can do the design in that particular area. Is there anything to think about if you need a computer or if you need to upgrade a computer? What kind of thing would you need to think about for the computer that you'll need? And some examples of portfolio websites, because as you do this work, if you're trying to get into this industry, it's very much a portfolio-based industry. So you want to show your work and show people what you are capable of. So we want to go through some examples of portfolio websites, and it's very important for getting your job or getting a client to show them work that you've done. So that's an important way to get into the industry. You'll definitely need to create a portfolio, so have that URL, have that website address on your resume, so that when you send it out, people will be able to go there. To be honest, when I'm looking at a potential employee, the first thing I want to look at is their website. I want to see how good their work is, because regardless of what the resume says, if their work is good or if it's bad, that speaks volumes about that designer. They could have tons of great experience, but if the work is all bad, it doesn't really matter if their experience sounds good on paper. For the reality is that their work isn't very good, then I'm not going to be interested in hiring that designer. So we'll go through these different types of designs. And so in general, how you're going to get started, first of all, you need to think about what kind of design you're interested in. There are lots of different design types. Some of them overlap, so you don't have to just choose one only. You can often do different types of design. For myself, I like to do a variety of different types of design, so don't feel like you have to pick just one of them. You can do multiple types. You don't have to. You can specialize on one, but you do have to figure out what kind of design you're most interested in to start learning that particular type of design. You'll need to learn some apps that you're going to be designing with so that you can execute your ideas and build websites or create videos or whatever it is you want to design. You'll need to learn some apps to be able to do that with. There will also be design concepts. So the apps are the technical part of how you build something, but you also need to learn what creates good design: typography, color, composition, user interaction, things about if you're doing video, when do you cut the video? Those are the design concepts of what makes a good design, not just how can I do this thing, how can I execute it. Just because you can build a web page in a design app doesn't mean it's going to be a good looking one. Just because you can make some cuts in a video doesn't mean it's going to be a compelling video. So you want to learn the mechanics of how to do it, but also what should you do. How do you be a good designer? What makes good design? Practice, practice, practice. It's very important that as you're getting started, you need to learn the apps and get good with the apps. And the way that you get good at doing something is practice. When it comes to physical things, like if you're learning to dance, you will often do those dance steps over and over again until you drill them into your brain and you can just start to almost feel it. Like you don't have to think about the steps that you're doing. Same thing with design apps. When you're first learning a design app, you need to practice it until you remember where all the features are, so you can start to just use the app and not be hindered by that app. And also what creates good design. The more you create designs, the better you're going to get at creating good designs. So it's very important to practice, especially in the beginning, to make yourself better. It's going to make you faster at the software and also make you a better designer. And it's also very important to build a portfolio. And we do this throughout our whole career, but especially in the beginning, as you're practicing these programs, learning how to use the programs, and working on the design skills as well, you're going to be wanting to build up some work to put in your portfolio. These can be conceptual pieces. They don't all have to be real life pieces, but you're going to need to build up a body of work to put into a portfolio website so that you can send somebody your website and say, hey, go check out my work, and they can see your work and think about hiring you either for a job or hiring you for, if it's a client, hiring you to do some work for them. So let's go over different types of design. We're going to start with the general graphic design. This really is encompassing of lots of different kinds of design. It is a very wide type of design. Really anything that you're visually trying to communicate through artwork, whether it's images, text, you're trying to communicate something visually. That's what graphic design really is. So it's a very broad definition because it really encompasses lots of kinds of design. Logos, ads, social media graphics, magazines, books, websites, apps, wayfinding, like doing signage, packaging, all sorts of things. They're all under graphic design. Video, if you're designing graphics for video, that's graphic design, creating the look of the graphics that go into video. Sometimes there's titling graphics. Those are graphic design. So it's lots of different mediums, whether it's print, web, presentation. So like PowerPoint presentations, that's graphic design too. Motion design as well. There's lots of different mediums. So video is also another medium. And sometimes I think people, because graphic design has been around for so long, they mistakenly think graphic design is an old school thing and that it's just print design, for example, which is not the case. Print design is one kind of graphic design, but web design is also a kind of graphic design. Now, if I say I'm a graphic designer, that doesn't really tell you much about what it is that I do, because there's lots of things that a graphic designer could do. They could do print, they could do web, they could do apps, they could do all sorts of things. So typically people will say, if they specialize on an area, they'll say, I'm an app designer, I'm a website designer, I'm a print designer. They might give you a specific area. They might say, I'm a motion designer or a video editor. So sometimes I think when they say graphic design, I think some people have this connotation of older types of designs of print, because print has been around for longer than the newer digital types of design. But graphic design isn't limited to just print design. That is just one kind of graphic design. It is much broader than that. So we'll go through some examples of different types of design just to kind of give you an idea of work. Also, these things are things for you to keep in mind to kind of be inspired by things when we're taking a look at some of these works. You might see portfolio websites in here. We will talk about portfolio websites at the end of the session here, but as we're going through, we might see portfolio examples as well. So for example, logo design. This is a very smart logo that Ignacio created, the Nutriversity. So Nutriversity, it's forks that are the pillars of the university. It's a beautiful, iconic piece and very smart too. Sometimes a good logo design, when you see it and you're like, oh man, that's just the perfect thing. It's not always an obvious thing to come up with a good, iconic logo design. It can be very challenging, in fact. I think it's deceivingly simple. When you look at a logo, you're like, oh, it's just a simple little thing. But to distill down a concept into a very iconic, unique branded piece is actually quite challenging. And sometimes the obvious design that you see was not necessarily at all obvious to get to that solution. But of course, a good design should look obvious when you see it. You're like, of course, that's perfect. Doesn't mean it was easy to come up with that solution. He's got a bunch of other logos in here. Wonderful logo designer here. Debugging is a really cool one. It's the D, the E, and the B for debugging, and it's a little bug. So again, iconic. It actually makes very smart sense of DEB for the debugging part of it. Very smart, very iconic, very simplified, beautiful kind of mark here. So just lots of really smart cool stuff. It was Wild Ventures. This is a beautiful mark here as well. Wild Ventures here. The eye with the elephant in it, very unique styling. The typography is beautiful. Just a lot of work that's really good. Pajama Nation. I love Pajama Nation. That's a fun little thing here with the simple pajamas flying on a flag, and Furniture Taxi. I'll end with this one here. Again, just beautifully simple, simplistic, but very iconic, quick, easy to recognize. It's just some beautiful work as an example of logos here. Book design. I used to work in a design studio that did a lot of books, and I would say that I designed books, and people would say, "Oh, you do the covers?" And I said, "Well, yeah, covers were definitely part of it, but also, the 1,000 pages that come in between," because I've worked on Jansen's History of Art, a redesign of that, and that's a 1,000-page art history book, and we were fortunate to win the second place in the New York Book Show that year, which was great. It was an honor to be able to win an award for design, and it's a lot of work that goes into building a book, because there's the cover, of course, that's one important part, but in the case of Jansen's History of Art, that was 1,000 pages. It was a year-long project. It took a long time to lay out all of those pages. It was a big project. It wasn't the only thing we worked on for a year. Of course, there were other things that we were working on in that year, but it took the course of a year to do that book. So they are big projects. And I'm going to click on this to take a look at this portfolio site. This is a beautifully presented piece here. Nice photography presenting the book here. You see all the aspects of the outer part and the inner part, and just beautifully designed. Also beautifully presented here in the portfolio. I love that they zoom in and take a close look at the typography and the subtleties of the typography. If they didn't give such nice, clear, big examples, I wouldn't be able to appreciate some of the subtlety of the type choices that they made. So it's nice to see the big picture of how it looks on kind of a spread level here, but then also to kind of punch in and see some exact details, to see the subtle qualities of some of the things that were done. So a nice presentation here in terms of the portfolio as well, and just showing a bunch of spreads so you can see the variety of different types of layouts that are done here. And I like, again, that they punch in here and show a closer look at some of the details of the type design that was done. So that's an example of book design. Social media graphics. So when companies are posting their graphics on social media, someone has to design those so that they are quickly scannable, that as somebody's scrolling through their feeds, that they can just get a quick read. You're not going to put a ton of content into a social media graphic. It's going to be something that is just a short little singular message, and somebody needs to be able to read the text really quickly, and somebody needs to design those graphics. In this case, for this company, they put out social media graphics that people can share to try to spread the word about certain issues that they're trying to talk about. And so they put these out there that people can download. So someone designs these, they post them on the website and say, hey, if you want to help spread the word about this particular message, and their messages change from time to time, you can download these social media graphics and then you can share them on your social media. But that's just in this particular case. If you're a company and you're wanting to post your own social media graphics, someone needs to design those and make them quickly, easily scannable so that they look nice and attractive in your social media feed, whether it's Twitter or Facebook or whatever social media that is. So in there, you're dealing with typography and color, there's composition, and somebody needs to think about all those things to make a compelling graphic that's hopefully going to catch the eye of somebody scrolling through their social media feed. PowerPoint is something that sometimes people give a bad rap to PowerPoint. They're like, "Oh, PowerPoint design. That's not design." Well, it's not the app that is responsible for good or bad design. It's the designer who's responsible. So PowerPoint is just a tool. Just like Photoshop is a tool, InDesign, Adobe XD, Sketch, whatever the app is to design in, that's just a tool. And no matter how good or bad the tool is, somebody can do good or bad design in that tool. So if you're using PowerPoint with its pre-made themes, then you might look like a bunch of other presentations that people have given, and it might be boring because you've seen that theme been used a bunch of different times, and so it just looks like the same old presentation time and time again. So in that case, it might have been a perfectly good design to start with, but you just get sick of it because you see it over and over again. Or maybe that theme doesn't fit the content that you're working with. Maybe you need a custom designed theme. And so PowerPoint lets you design anything you want. If you use the stock theme, that's your design choice. But you can start with something basically completely blank, and you can do a completely custom designed PowerPoint presentation. There are some people that are purely PowerPoint designers, and that's all they do for a career. Now, a lot of graphic designers typically like to use Adobe apps, and so they kind of don't like to use Microsoft products like PowerPoint. So a lot of designers look down upon PowerPoint, but that's just because they don't know that particular program or they might not like to use it. But there's a lot of companies that need good presentation design. Tons of companies are run based on giving presentations to win projects, to talk to clients. They need to present information. And if those presentations are given with compelling graphics, it can make a huge difference in that business's success. So whether we like it or not, presentations are something that are important for businesses to use. And a lot of people making presentations are not designers. And so if you have a designer working on the presentation, making it look better, it's going to be a more compelling presentation. So as an example here, this is a more compelling kind of presentation. And actually, I'm just going to turn off the sound here just so we can just watch the presentation here and not hear the sound. So here, this is not some sort of custom PowerPoint kind of theme. There's custom animation, custom design, beautiful photography. The transitions from one slide to the next are custom made animations rather than just the stock transitions that PowerPoint gives you. If you just use the stock transitions that PowerPoint gives you, then maybe that gets tired and old because everybody's seen those before. But when you do custom animations, it becomes more compelling because you're animating the things you want people to look at. It takes a little bit more time, and that's why not everybody does that. So you can make beautiful presentations. It's really in the hands of the designer. Yes. So don't blame the tool just because they give the average person the ability to make something with like a stock theme. So PowerPoint tries to enable anybody to just create a presentation without it looking horrible. So they give you a bunch of pre-made themes, but a true PowerPoint designer isn't going to limit themselves to just those themes. They're going to design anything that they want, and they're going to create custom graphics and custom animations, and they can create something beautiful. So it can be a niche that you can get into where your typical designer most designers don't want to learn PowerPoint. So they look down upon presentation design, they look down upon PowerPoint, and so they just don't want to get into that. So that could be a niche where you could say, well, I'm okay with doing presentation design. Let me do that because not a lot of other designers do that. Like I said, I know some people that have been a PowerPoint designer, a presentation designer for like 30 years. Now, unfortunately, PowerPoint is better on Windows than the Mac. The Mac version has gotten a lot better, but if you're going to be a serious PowerPoint presentation designer, you're probably going to want to do most of the work on Windows because most of the businesses are running Windows, and that's one of the reasons why it's a little bit of a turnoff to a lot of designers who tend to like Macs better. Granted, I personally do prefer using a Mac, but PowerPoint is definitely better on Windows. So if I was doing much work in PowerPoint, I would want to do it on the Windows version of PowerPoint. Hopefully in the future, the Mac version will get good enough that I don't have to say that anymore. It has definitely gotten a lot better over the years, and it's not as bad as it once was. They've gotten a lot more equal across the platforms, but there are still some things we can do in PowerPoint on Windows that we can't do on the Mac, unfortunately. The reverse is true for a lot of other software that sometimes it's better on the Mac, but with PowerPoint, it's a Microsoft program, so they make it better on Windows. So apps for graphic design, There are lots of different ones you could use, but in the general sense, in a generalist graphic designer, most general graphic designers are going to know Photoshop, InDesign, and Illustrator. Most of them will not know PowerPoint. I threw that in there just as kind of a niche thing. Most designers don't know it, but just want to throw that out there that a lot of people don't think about that kind of design. And that could be an area that might be interesting that your average designer doesn't get into. But most designers are going to know they're going to know Photoshop. Photoshop is for doing image retouching and general graphics. InDesign is for page layouts, especially multiple pages. So InDesign is where you're going to lay out books, magazines, or any multi-page documents. And Illustrator is for creating icons, logos, kind of graphical looking things. Packaging design, patterns are often done in Illustrator. Those are the kind of design things you'll be doing in those design apps. We do have a certificate in graphic design in case you want to learn more about graphic design in general. In that certificate program, we teach all of the main Adobe programs. So we teach InDesign, Photoshop, Illustrator, and then our graphic design bootcamp concentrates on the what to do on a conceptual level of what makes good design. How do you actually create something that is visually appealing? What's the typography choices? What's the color and composition and that type of stuff? We talk about those general graphic design concepts in the graphic design bootcamp. So we're going to go through different types of design. Graphic design is one, and maybe all these other kind of things are under the umbrella of graphic design, but we'll get more specialized and talk about certain different areas. So user experience design or UX design. What exactly is that? Designing the experience of using something. Now, this can be a digital product. It could be an in-person experience as well. But the idea is that you're designing the customer experience, which you want to be easy, intuitive, and anticipate their needs. So we often call it user-centric design because we want to be concerned with the user and what's their experience going to be like. So user-centric design will often include you getting to know who your users are. How are you going to meet the needs of people that you don't understand? So user research is going to let you understand your users better. Product development, so that's actually thinking about the user needs certain things. Oh, this product doesn't fulfill those needs. Maybe the product needs to get better. Whether it's the app or the website, maybe the product needs to change to fit the needs of the user. We test on users to see, okay, we created a design. Does this work? Let me try it out on people to see if I succeeded. Oh, they're having some problems. Let me go back and rework and see if I can make it easier for them to do things. If you want to learn more about exactly what user experience is, we have a whole article where you can read what is user experience design. We have that article posted on our blogs. So any of these green pieces of text, you can click it and it'll open up a link in a new tab so that you can read those articles. And again, this website address here is nobledesktop.com/presentation/get-started-in-design. You don't have to worry about the extra part there. That's just the slide number that I happen to be on. So some examples of user experience design. Let's take a look at what somebody might be creating as a UX designer. So as far as the deliverables of what you could be giving someone, let's go through here. So they talk about different things of like empathizing with the users, defining what the problem is based on the user's needs. You go through and generate some ideas. The prototype is what you can use to create something that you can put in front of users so that you can show them examples of an app or a website, and they can kind of tap through and go through and try this website or try that app out, and you can use that to test on users to evaluate the effectiveness of that design. So one of the things that are created here are something called personas. Personas are basically thinking about the kind of stereotypical type of user. You're coming up with like a person, and this could be a literal person or just a name that you come up with to say, okay, there's this kind of person who has these sort of needs, these sort of behaviors, so that you can kind of understand this is like a typical type of person that would be using your website or app. And you can come up with several different personas, and throughout your evaluation process, you're keeping those personas in mind. Well, is this going to suit the needs of Melissa? Is this going to suit the needs of Doug or whoever it is? So you come up with several different personas for different types of users and make sure that everything you do is going to fulfill the needs of various users that you're dealing with. You can come up with storyboards. So the idea is kind of mapping out what it would be like to go through and do something. So it's kind of like movies, actually, they do storyboards. So you can kind of loosely kind of plan out how something's going to work within the product or the app or the website. And you come up with a more specific journey map of, okay, they're going to do this, and then they're going to do this, and then do they come back and edit something? How do they move to the next step? What's the flow going through going to be like for the journey of the customer? We're trying to get them through a successful journey so that they start somewhere and then they end somewhere. Maybe they bought a product. Maybe they've signed up for a service. Maybe they posted a photo to Instagram, whatever it happens to be. So just some examples of things here. Here's a user flow diagram that shows what's going to happen on the specific website. Okay, they're going to go to the homepage and then they're going to go somewhere. Are they going to go over here? And then they end up being back. And so it just flows through from point A to point B or C. How's it going to work for them to go through? This is going to be helpful for doing a prototype to flow through those pages. So you can come up with a prototype and make something that is clickable prototype, actually, so that they can click through, and you click on one thing, you go to another place, and you can actually put that in front of people. They could be very low fidelity prototypes, or they could be very high fidelity prototypes where they really look like the exact app. They're not the actual app, though. They're just a prototype of what it would look like. It's not the actual fully functional thing. They can still be somewhat functional in that you can tap on it and go somewhere, but they're not the actual final website or the actual final app. And then you can give a usability report, which kind of wraps up all the stuff into a final report that tells the business, okay, so this is what we evaluated, this is what we learned, this is our suggestion of what's going to go on. So you can read more in depth here if you want to, but hopefully that gives you a little bit of an idea of what things you might be doing. It's very user-centric focused. So it's kind of product and user, and trying to align users' needs with the product itself. And generally, what's good for the user is also going to be good for the product as well. So if you're fulfilling the needs of what people want, then they're going to enjoy the product or the service that you're offering. And if you can come up with a good solution of how they're going to go through and maybe sign up for the product or whatever it is, you come up with a good user flow to make it easy for them to use, then you have a better user experience. If you want to look at a portfolio of a UX researcher and designer, here's an example of a portfolio. Here she kind of talked about how she ended up going through user experience and kind of what she did to kind of get there. So she did some web design stuff and kind of got to user experience. And then she has some case studies down here. She's written some articles, but these are her case studies. A lot of times UX designers will put up a case study. UX designers are not necessarily creating something beautiful in the end, because a user interface designer is typically responsible for the visual parts of it. But what a user experience designer is really focused on is understanding the user, so doing research. Based on that research, figuring out some sort of analysis of the needs and trying to figure out, okay, these people need this. What can the solution be? And then coming up with a suggested design. Now, the design is a high-level plan. It's not necessarily beautiful with typography and color. That's often the responsibility of a UI or user interface designer to make it look beautiful. But a UX designer is more thinking big picture of how things in general, like where is the content going to go? On which pages? What's the flow going to be like? First, they're going to do this task. Then they're going to do this task. So they get to really know the project. They'll do competitor analysis. They'll look at the content that's there, trying to understand what content is there. Do they need to add content? Should they remove some of the content? And try to figure out, like, what are the stumbling blocks of maybe where they have a problem? What are the problem areas of the thing? They'll come up with how people would move through the product and what their flow would be like. Okay, where are they going to start? Where are they going to end? And there could be wireframing to create some prototypes. So you kind of block out in a general sense of where things go. So you're trying to figure out where content goes, what pages is going to be. Okay, this is going to be there. You're going to click on that. You're going to go to some other place. And then it could be testing it on users. So it's often talking about the problem and the solution. In a user experience design, it's often analyzing what the problems are and coming up with a solution. It's not just showing a pretty picture and like, look at this beautiful thing that I made. It's really coming up with a solution to a problem. So that's why a lot of these white papers are presented as a combination of visuals and text descriptions, because without the text description, you can't really look at this visual and understand what was really going on. So you really want to read about this project and understand, okay, what was the problem and what was her solution, and why was that a good choice for a user experience designer to make. So user experience design portfolios, while they do have some visuals, there's definitely going to be some more writing involved in those, because you need to convey that we found what the problem was, we came up with a solution, how do we verify the solution, and giving a bigger context to the work that you're doing. For doing UX design, apps that you might use, Sketch is a Mac-only design app, and it can be used for doing visual design, for user experience design or UI design. So you can do it for multiple purposes. You could do very low fidelity design for UX, doing things like wireframing and basic prototypes. You can also do very tight visual design or UI design. So we can see from the very beginning all the way through the end to do design. It's not made by Adobe, so Adobe has their own version of that as well, because you have Adobe Photoshop and Illustrator and InDesign for their visual and UX design software. They have Adobe XD, which is experience design. This is user experience, so they have their experience design tool. Basically, this is Adobe's version of Sketch. It runs on both Mac and PC. Sketch has an early lead, so that it's very popular, especially a lot of designers do like to use Mac. So there's a lot of people using Sketch, but Adobe XD has been gaining steam and more people are using it. But right now, Sketch is definitely still ahead of the game in terms of users. There's a lot of people using Sketch. But over the years, I think we're going to see more and more people using Adobe XD because it's included with the Creative Cloud that a lot of designers already have. So you might see people using Sketch, Adobe XD. There are also other tools out there, like Axure is for doing, you could do some very complex prototyping and very high fidelity type stuff. Not so much of a visual designer's first choice. It's more popular in people that are doing solely UX design. Typical visual designer is not going to use Axure as much. It's a more complex tool to use. It's very powerful, but that complexity is not necessary for every single project. So some places like to use it if they need to do very high fidelity prototyping and kind of more complex prototyping scenarios. Sketch and Adobe XD are simpler in what they can do prototyping wise. So some people like to use Axure because of the power that it gives them. InVision has been popular because it has integrated with things like Sketch to offer prototyping. Some of those features are now being incorporated into Sketch. So in some ways, InVision use is going down for some people. They actually made their own separate program called InVision Studio, which is kind of their competitor to Adobe XD and Sketch. And so some people do use InVision for doing things like prototyping as well. So you might hear InVision being used. So these are some of the apps. And this is any of these sections where I talk about the apps. These are not exhaustive list of all of the apps that are out there that you might potentially use. I'm just going to go over the most commonly used ones that are out there. So we have a question in the chat. Why do more designers like Mac over Windows? Part of it is just personal preference. In the beginning stages, when we first got started in design, Windows just didn't support what we needed to do good design apps. So in the beginning, Macs were the only place you could do it. The software was written for a Mac, and Windows wasn't very good at doing it because the Windows software wasn't good enough to support the graphics needs. That eventually changed, and Windows got good enough so that we could do the same apps on Windows that we have on the Mac. So today, you can run most of the software on Mac or PC. It's just a matter of whoever writes it. Do they decide to run it on Mac or PC? There are some things that are a little bit nicer on the Mac in terms of like keyboard shortcuts that you're using. But for the most part, I'd say these days it's really just personal preference. It used to be that you had to use a Mac because that's where the software was written, but nowadays it's either or. I just like how the Mac works better than Windows. And there are more software still written for the Mac, like Sketch being a Mac-only program. So still today, even though they could write Sketch for Windows if they wanted to, more designers typically use Macs. We like using Macs, so they keep making software for Macs. But most serious software like Adobe XD, all the Creative Cloud apps, they all work on Mac and PC. But even Adobe XD, when it was first released as a Mac-only beta, and then eventually the Windows version was released. So it is somewhat self-fulfilling that designers use Macs, and it's easier to design on a Mac. But if you want to design on Windows, you can. All the major softwares are on both Mac and PC. But if you are getting into the design industry, you are going against the grain if you're on Windows. You can totally do it. I know lots of people that are designers that are on Windows, so you can, but more designers are going to be on a Mac that are on Windows. So if you're going into a design studio, most likely they're going to be a Mac-based studio. You definitely want to be familiar with Mac if you're getting into the design industry. And so, yes, Sketch is a Mac-only app. It only works on Mac. Now, Adobe XD, that is for Mac and PC. For the most part, the apps work very similarly across platforms these days. For learning UX design, we do have some different UX design classes, and we also even have a UX and user interface design certificate. I'm going to be talking about user interface design next. In our UX and UI design certificate, we actually go over both sides of things, the experience of using something as well as the visual design of creating something that is attractive. In there, we teach Sketch because it's the most popular design app that works on both that both UX designers and UI designers use. If you were on Windows, you could swap that out for something like Adobe XD, so we can always adjust to that. But I would actually recommend, if you're getting into UX and UI, even if you're on Windows, learning Sketch, because even though Sketch is Mac only, if you go into the design realm of UX, you're probably going to need to work on a Mac if you're going into a design studio, and so they probably will be using Sketch. It's very likely if you're doing UX that you're going to have to use Sketch at some point. Even if at home you don't have a Mac, in the studio you'd probably have to use a Mac with Sketch. We also get into the design parts of user experience design, which is the conceptual parts of user flows and user personas and doing user testing and all that, those kind of design concepts. We also talk about Photoshop and Illustrator because as a user interface designer, you do need to care about how things look. So you'd have some photo retouching that you might do. You might draw some iconography. And then the visual design side, which is how things look. We go into making things look good with typography and color. And so the UX and UI certificate combines how things work and how things look into a single thing. All right, so next up is the UI design. So UI, or user interface design, and web design. When I say user interface, really that's the interface of anything that has a digital kind of experience. So this could be a website, it could be an app. So sometimes people will call this visual design, sometimes they call it web design, sometimes they call it user interface design. There's general different terms that people will use, and they sometimes mean the same thing. I think visual design is something that a lot of people like using nowadays. Visual design, what's visual? Isn't everything visual that we've been talking about? Like technically, graphic design has a visual side of things, but like I said earlier, because graphic design is often it's been a term that's been around for longer. Some people have this connotation that graphic design is print design. So I think people wanted a new term to mean like digital design, but they didn't want to say digital design. So they came up with this idea of visual design. User interface design, web design, it can all be the same kind of stuff. So user interface, something that has a visual of a digital product. It could be a website, it could be an app. Now, if I design websites, if I say I'm a web designer, then that doesn't mean that I do apps. That might be a totally different thing. If I say I'm a user interface designer, then I would have to clarify to somebody what kind of user interface. Is it for apps? Is it for websites? Is it for something else? So in our interfaces for apps, websites. There's layouts, there's type, there's color, there's composition. There are visual components, and you're trying to make something look beautiful. The user experience designer is concerning about how things work, and the user interface or visual designer cares about how things look, trying to make it attractive and beautiful. So sometimes we call it visual design. It basically means the same kind of stuff. The interesting thing about these digital products, websites and apps, is that you have things like animation that you can add. There's interactivity, so the user can do something and something else can happen. So that's the thing that sets it apart from a static medium like print. Now, I say that because if you are doing some sort of design already, like maybe you are doing print and you want to get more into digital design, a lot of things you know from print design translate over. So things like typography and color and composition, those are timeless concepts that work across different types of design. And so some of those things will translate over to app design or to web design. That said, there are new things to think about. So you're throwing in some extra abilities that you have, some new things to think about to make the transition if you're transitioning from print to other types of design. So some examples. Now, I know you've all seen websites, but even though I'm going to show you some websites here, more think critically when you're looking at these. A lot of us have browsed websites, but not really thought about the website that we're looking at. So look at these things as examples of design and think of how they convey their product or their service, how the things look, the typography, the color choices. Actually analyze its design and not just like, oh, what's this website about? So I chose some visually different kinds of websites just so we can see a variety of things. So here's a very beautiful kind of monochromatic color scheme, a nice bright blue, very simplified kind of color scheme, which they use throughout the website, which is quite nice because they kind of brand it consistently, this nice blue. That's a comforting blue. They keep a consistent type of visuals, and they do a lot of fun things on this site. For example, as I hover over, I get this nice little bit of interactivity where the background animates a little bit, which is quite nice. Also, as I mouse over certain things, a button will appear. So this is the interactive part where I said that in web design and app design, you don't have to show everything right away. You can decide, what do I want to reveal when the user does something? For example, down here, there's tabbed areas. I can click on a tab to see a different area. Somebody had to make that choice to say, I don't want to spread these things out as 4 different things that people have to scroll through. I want to combine them into 4 different tabs. It's possible that somebody doesn't click on those other things and they never saw them. So they must have thought conceptually these things belong together. I don't want to make people scroll through too much content there. I want to combine them into this more interactive type of piece. Because since we can change this user interface based on the user doing something, we don't have to show everything. It's not like a printed page where the printed page is made and it can't be changed after the fact. So you have to show everything that you have. No, this is an interactive medium. So you can have menus that appear when you mouse over. You don't have to show everything right away. You can also do animation. So for example, here, it does some animation going between the testimonials, and also does a fun little animation down here when I click into the your email part. It kind of sucks in the surrounding stuff, kind of drawing my attention in here. And it's kind of a fun little playful way of drawing my attention to the thing that I clicked on. Stripe has a beautiful website. If you're not familiar with the Stripe brand, they do credit card processing for companies, and their corporate style is this diagonal. It's built into their logo. Their logo has a little bit of a diagonal on the T, the I, and the P. So they have a little bit of a striped diagonal built into their logo, and they use that throughout the design. Not every single thing has a diagonal because that would be too much of a good thing, but they use those diagonals in some cases. They also do fun little animations that aren't too overwhelming, but every once in a while just give the eye just a little bit of visual interest that the animation will kick in and do something interesting. Also, when you hover over, you get a fun little animation there where it kind of blurs out the background to focus on what you want people to do. You got this little lift off where it just lifts off just a little bit. Kind of fun little animation there. Just little subtle things like that. Just beautiful style, the typography, the color scheme. When I mouse over a menu, there's this like 3D flip of the menu, which is nice. Just a subtle little 3D flip there. You can go to a section, and each section kind of has a different feeling in terms of color. So it's almost like they've color coded each area of the website, but yet in a way that still feels cohesive across the sites. They use the diagonal to their advantage to create some interesting compositions and create some interesting lines. So it's not so square all the time. There are parts that are nice and evenly kind of rectangular to kind of simplify things, but they offset it with some nice dynamic lines here, creating some compelling imagery here, and nice icon design throughout again. So some really nice stuff that Stripe is doing. This one is a very simple site, but I kind of like it in its simplicity and for the little bit of animation that they do. When I hover over any of these hats, the back of the hat lifts up, but the front of it doesn't really lift up much. So they're kind of tipping the hat, right? So gentlemen would tip their hat to somebody when you would meet them. So if I mouse over, it does a little tip of the hat, right? So you'd grab the hat and you'd lift it up a little bit. So they're using this like old school, like this is like a traditional kind of hat making place. These are very expensive hats. I don't know how I came across this website because I'm not in the business of buying $1,200 hats. Yes, you read that right. $1,195 for a hat. These are very expensive hats. They are beautiful hats, but they are very expensive hats. But somehow I came across this website. But it's just a beautifully done, simplistic site. But I love that little like tip of the hat. It's a throwback to the olden days, but yet still feels very modern. And I love that when I click on this, watch the hat come in. So it's kind of like they toss their hat into the ring. Right? There's just that little bit of a toss. And in fact, when I go to the next image, see how it just kind of sits down on, and it does that little bit of a twist. Like it just adds a little bit of realism. That little bit of a shadow down here, this shadow stays there. So it feels like it's in a 3D space. And all this is just a slideshow. But to do this little twist on a slideshow, like we've all seen a slideshow where we've gone from one photo to another. And it's a standard thing on websites, but yet they brought a little interest to this slideshow just to make it look a little more alive and elevate their design to a new level. I remember hearing somebody talk about good logo design years ago, and it was in a video. I don't have the link anymore because it was years ago that I watched it, but they talked about what makes a good logo design is often just one visual trick. You don't need to put in tons of visual tricks because that dilutes everything, but if you have one kind of hook, then that can be enough for a good logo. And I think this website illustrates this perfectly. Just one little hook, one little interest thing, like this little making the hat feel alive, whether it's the little bit of a hat tip here or the sliding in of the hat. They didn't have to do a ton of different things. Just this one little thing just makes it very simple, very elegant, and makes it interesting and sets it apart from every other website, because I've never seen a site do quite something just like this. So they took something very common and just gave a little bit of twist to make it less common. And then they charge $1,000 a hat. So hopefully they're good quality hats, but a beautiful website. Now, Harvard Law Review. Picture in your mind what you think Harvard Law Review is going to look like. Obviously, it's about law. It's about legal stuff. So you might have in your mind a boring, legal kind of site, but it's a beautiful website. It is beautifully done typography. So it is mainly a typographic website because the law is written law, but beautiful typography, a very elegant, clean, easy to read font, beautiful colors. So they actually put in a bunch of nice work into the patterns of the colors to brighten this up so it doesn't feel dull and drab. They put in subtle little design elements, like the little bit of an underline here. At the bottom here, look at this beautiful lockup down here. Very elegant type with thin little details, like the subtlety of these little different details here. The nice amount of space so it doesn't feel crammed. The nice spacing of the columns. So we just have a simple text column with plenty of white space so you don't get overwhelmed by the amount of text that you see. It's a very beautifully designed website. It's bright because of the colors that they chose. It's airy because of the amount of space that they chose. The typography is beautiful, a very nicely designed website with clear differences between like the category, the heading, who it's by, the text. Like each piece of text is beautifully designed to go with each other, but yet to clearly identify its unique role of the content in the website. So hopefully looking at these examples is kind of giving you ideas that they were all very different kind of websites, and some were much more simple than other ones, but that you could do a lot with typography and color, and that really designers have a lot of impact in how beautiful something is and also how functional it is too. So for app design, you can kind of do whatever you want. So you can look like a typical iOS app, or you can look at the like the typical Android app. You could look like that. They do have stereotypical kind of design feelings, and so Apple would say, "Oh, all your iOS apps should look this way." But what ends up happening is that a lot of apps want to feel unique, and so they will often not look exactly like the system does, and they want to come up with a unique interface that's uniquely their own. So it feels like Spotify, or it feels like Facebook, and it feels a little different than the rest. Granted, a tab bar across the bottom is a common design motif that a lot of apps will use because it's a usability thing. Your fingers are down here at the bottom, so having a bar of tabs across the bottom is just easy to tap on. People would try to put the menus up at the top, and they weren't as effective because people had to reach really far. So they wouldn't go into the menu at the top. Putting the tabs at the bottom made it easier to use. That's kind of a user experience design thing of making something that is easier to use. The visual designer wants to make something look nice. So the user experience designer might decide what tabs go at the bottom, and the visual designer says, I want to make it look like this. I'm going to create these icons. I'm going to put this color in here. So as an app designer, though, not all apps necessarily need a tab bar of 5 things across the bottom. So you can do different, very different feelings of apps. And as long as it works for what that app's purpose is, you can often have a lot more creative freedom when creating apps, because every app does different things. Like if you look at games, so many different games have completely different user experiences. And as long as it's easy to follow how to use that game, how to play that game, it can work. It's not like all games look and work the same exact way. Same things with, I think, all apps, is that apps can have a wide variety of different design types. And yes, there are some kind of user experience consistencies that we can make across our apps that might help users to understand how to use them. But visually, they can be very different and distinct. And I think also in terms of user experience, there's a wider variety of user experiences that can work in apps compared to websites. I think websites are a little bit more standardized in terms of like, okay, these things work well, let's do these things. And yeah, you do have a lot of flexibility within that, but in terms of usability, I think there maybe are some more standards. But I think you can be a bit more creative in apps to some extent. So for doing user interface or web design. So once again, Sketch can be used for user experience design, and it can also be used for UI or web design. Sketch is a Mac-only app. Adobe XD is Adobe's version of Sketch, essentially. It is for Mac and PC. Some people are using Photoshop as well. Photoshop's been around for a long time. It used to be the #1 web design tool. That has changed as more and more people are switching over to Sketch and Adobe XD. But that said, lots of designers use Photoshop, whether they're using it just for web design or whether they're using it for photo editing, because you can edit your photos, you can do color correction, you can retouch. And in our websites and in our apps, we're often retouching the imagery that we're putting in there. So I'm going to always need Photoshop to some extent, whether I'm just using it for photo editing, or sometimes I might need to be creating graphics. I might create a social media post for a company. I might create that in Photoshop because it's going to be a pixel-based graphic in the end, so Photoshop can do that. But you can actually design whole websites in Photoshop, and that used to be the norm. That's starting to change. There's still a bunch of people using Photoshop, believe it or not. Lots of people are using Photoshop to do their website design, but times are changing, and even though some people are using Photoshop, there's now a lot of people using Sketch and Adobe XD because those are more tuned to the needs of an app designer or a web designer. So tides are shifting. We're moving towards Sketch and Adobe XD in general for web design and app design. But if you go into a shop, some of them are still using Photoshop for doing their website design. And you still might get a web developer that says, hey, give me a Photoshop file. Times are changing, but there's not really one kind of killer app that everybody uses. And there's not like a one industry monopoly thing for doing user interface and web design. Adobe Illustrator is also useful because if you're designing icons and logos and things that are going to go into websites or apps, Illustrator is a great drawing tool, so we do often use it and then use our work in Adobe XD or Sketch. So Illustrator is good to know. If you're going to code, I know that there was a question that popped up about is coding useful? Like, do you need to know HTML? And I didn't answer that because I knew I was going to come to it. If you're going to be a developer, if you're going to do some coding, it's not really design part, but it's if you're doing the development of actually building the websites, then code editors such as Sublime Text or Atom or Visual Studio Code come into play because you're going to be coding the HTML, CSS, and JavaScript for building the website if that's an area that you want to get into. It's not the design side of things, it's the building side of things, which leads us into, should I learn to code? If you're doing web design, now if you're doing app design, I would say you don't need to learn how to code because app design and coding an app is hard. It's much higher level programming to code an app. If you're going to be a good app coder, that's what you're going to want to do because you're going to earn a lot more money coding apps than designing apps. Because not just anybody can learn to code applications like iOS and Android apps. They are complex. They're a high level programming that not everybody can do. Website coding, though, is much easier. It's much more attainable for your normal person. You don't have to be some super high level uber geek that studied computer science for years to get into coding websites. So it's much easier to get into coding websites. For me, coding websites is one of the easiest kind of coding that you can get into. I'm not saying it's all easy, but I'm just saying it's one of the easiest kind of coding that you can get into. And so if you are a designer and you want to be able to do some work in building websites or making edits to websites, coding skills are helpful. It's just how websites work. Understanding how code works lets you understand how the web works itself. So it's kind of like when I was studying print design in college, we went on to press, we saw how printing presses worked. And by understanding how printing presses worked, I understood how my designs were going to be turned into a physical print. Same thing when I learned how to do web design as well. Once I knew how the HTML and CSS and JavaScript code worked, I understood how my designs would be turned into code. Your designs will be turned into code. They will be coded as HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. And so the more you understand about that process, the more you can make sure that it's going to be a good process. It also helps you to communicate with developers. If you're the designer and a developer is going to be coding, the better you can communicate back and forth, that's going to help your design to be executed the way you envision it. Sometimes when designers hand off their stuff to developers and it comes back and it's changed and they don't understand why, that could be a lack of communication between the designer and the developer. It also helps you to know what you can do because the websites themselves the capabilities are dictated by browsers. Web browsers say, you can do this, you can do that. So they understand certain code. If you understand what the code can do, then you know what's possible to design. You can design experiences based on certain functionality. So, for example, years ago, we could not do custom fonts in websites. Now we can because they added the capabilities to browsers. That's just a simple example of just knowing that browsers can do custom web fonts. Then you can use that in your design. On a higher level, the more you understand this process of turning design into code, the more you understand what's involved, what happens, how much work is it for the developers. It gives you a much deeper level of understanding of the whole process, and I think it's a valuable thing. It also, if you're going to design something, if you know how easy or hard it is to implement, even if you can't implement it yourself, you'll know, oh, wait, this is hard for the developer. We don't have the time or budget to do that. So let's not do that now. Maybe we'll come back and do that another time. I'll choose this easier to do way so that we can get this done on time and on budget. All right. So now web animation is a cool thing. I talked about animation just briefly before, but web animation is a fun area, and it's a cool thing if you've ever done static type designs like print design, for example. When you get onto the web, you can do animation, which is fun. So for example, animated GIFs. We have a Photoshop animated GIFs class where you can learn to create some animations. They can be very simple animations of just maybe text changing, for example, or you can do more complex animations with things changing, things moving. Here the background is animating. So you could do a lot of interesting things in animated GIF. Now, animated GIFs, the file sizes can get quite large, so animated GIFs are really best for short, quick little animations, which is perfect for emails. So the only reliable way to animate in an HTML email, and I say HTML email because I'm not talking about a text email that you get. Emails are written with the same technologies that the web uses, HTML and CSS. But emails are a bit different because we're not always in a web browser. We're sometimes in an email program like Microsoft Outlook. And so what we can do in a web page is much greater than what we can do in an email. So emails are kind of, we go back to old school ways, things that used to work years ago, and they don't get as many upgrades as frequently as web browsers do. So animated GIFs work reliably in all the email clients. They work quite well. And so we could do animated GIFs. So they're short, quick little animations, and you can create those things with Photoshop. You can also create animated GIFs with After Effects, but After Effects is like, you can do animation for all different types of things, especially video. So you can do it for video. You can also do it for animated GIFs. I'll show you an example of one that was created with Photoshop and one that was created with After Effects, just to kind of give you an idea of the difference. JavaScript is a way to animate anything within a web page. There's interactivity. If you've ever seen something like the slideshow, for example, that we just saw on that hats website, that was JavaScript. JavaScript doing the animation, JavaScript doing the slideshow. And so animation is typically done in a web page, often with JavaScript. GreenSock is a JavaScript library specifically made for animation. If you want to animate things on the web, if you want to animate banner ads, or anything within a web page, if your sole focus is animation, GreenSock is the best way to do it. It's an amazing JavaScript library, but it does require, when you're doing JavaScript, that you have to know HTML and CSS to put the page together, and then JavaScript to do the animation. So it does take a while to get up to that level to be able to animate things with GreenSock. If you just want to do a very simple animation, CSS is the styling language. It's the cascading style sheets language that we use to style things, and you can create some simple animations. It's not great for creating more complex animations, but if you want to do something like when you hover over a button and it gets bigger, you could do that. Like back in the Stripe website, when it hovered over an area and the drop shadow got a little bit bigger and the element got a little bit taller, that was probably done with CSS. So here's an example of a very simple animated GIF, something that you could create quite easily in Photoshop. Photoshop is good at creating simple, kind of quick, easy to create animated GIFs. And it's nice because of its simplicity. Although you do kind of hit a wall where if you want to create something much more complex, then Photoshop isn't as good as After Effects. So for the simple animated GIFs, Photoshop is great to use. For the more complex animated GIFs like this is better done with After Effects. So After Effects is like the king of animation. You can do animation for video, and you can also turn that into an animated GIF as well. So all these crazy things moving around, animating, that would be, if it's possible with Photoshop, it would be insanely hard to do with Photoshop. It's just too much stuff, too much complexity. Photoshop is good at the simple things. After Effects is a bit overkill if you want to do just a simple animated GIF, but if you want to do more complex things, After Effects is where it's at. So if you really want to get into animation, After Effects is a great program to learn. GreenSock, if you want to do coded animation within a web page, GreenSock is amazing. It does require coding though, and that's the downside to it. So it's not going to be accessible for everybody unless you know coding. But so here, these animations that are happening, see, one of the advantages of doing coded animations is they can be interactive if you want to. They can also perform very well on the web page and take over big portions of the web page. They display really quickly and smoothly. I don't know how smooth this is looking coming through Zoom, but if you look at this on your computer, it's a very smooth quality of animation, rendered at a very high frame rate, so it looks beautiful. Even though it covers a huge area of the page, I'm sure it does not take up a lot of file size, so it doesn't take long to download this. Something simple like this is probably a CSS rollover, just for doing a simple little rollover for this. But more complex animations like this would be done with GreenSock. Also here, animations like this, probably done with GreenSock as well. GreenSock for doing something like this. If they wanted to make them interactive, they also could make them interactive if they wanted to. See, like something like this is an animated GIF. Could you do it as an animated GIF? Yes, you could, but this is very smooth, very high frame rates. The file size of this as an animated GIF would probably be huge. So the advantages of doing it through code is that it's a much smaller file size, so the page is going to load a lot faster. So if you're getting into web design, whether it's you want to learn to build pages and design graphics, the web design certificate is going to teach you how to code websites, how to code emails, and create web graphics. So the web design is kind of a generalist kind of web design certificate. So you can learn how to code websites, code emails, and design the graphics that get put into those. The visual design focuses just on the design. So it's not about building sites, it's about designing how they're going to look. So in that case, you're going to learn things like, where do they have that? Oh, this is just the bootcamp, sorry, not the certificate. Actually, the visual design certificate is what I meant to link to there. The visual design certificate is going to teach you Photoshop, because if you're getting into visual design, you care about how things look. So you're going to want to learn Photoshop because you're going to want to be able to do image retouching. You're going to learn Illustrator for drawing, so you can draw icons and logos. Photoshop for doing web design, as well as Sketch, because some people are still using Photoshop. Some people are also using Sketch. It depends. We wanted to include both of those to make a well-rounded visual designer, because if you're going out there into the workforce, you're going to see that these are the two probably most popular ones out there right now. Also, the graphic design bootcamp to teach fundamental graphic design concepts and this general design. So typography, color, composition in a general design sense. And the visual design is focusing specifically on websites. So still goes into typography and color, but focuses on a website application versus graphic design, where you do things like logos and bigger picture type of general type of design. And then we have a web animation certificate if you want to learn web animation. So motion design, that is video editing and animation for video. Could be for web as well, but a lot of the times it's for video. So motion design, it's like graphic design, but it's for moving things. It's motion. It's design in motion. So video and animation, you're still dealing with graphic design elements. So you're still dealing with typography and color and composition when you're animating things. But the new things that you're thinking about are how things move, how it draws the eye around. There's a time element to this because you're watching it play out. There's sounds in there as well, combining video. So new things that you wouldn't think about with static mediums when you have this moving motion kind of medium. It can be for anything where you watch things play out. So it can be for television, it could be for movies, it could be on the web, it could be in applications. You could design the animation for an app. So it's not just for animating videos. It could be you're using After Effects to design the animation that's going to be used in an app. So the apps that people are using typically for motion design are After Effects if you're doing animation. And also if you're doing video editing, it's Adobe Premiere. So Adobe Premiere is the video editing side. After Effects can do some video stuff, although if you're just purely going to focus on video editing, cutting from one shot to another, doing transitions and things, really that's for Premiere. After Effects is the animation side of things. So whether it's title sequences, complete animation of any kind of things, whether it's you're incorporating video, audio, whether it's photos or drawn things. You can pretty much animate anything that you want, but it's focused on animation specifically. So After Effects, here's an example of just a simple little project that we get started with in After Effects Level 1, the first level of After Effects that we teach. So photos are moving, there's colored bars that are moving. Let's watch that one more time here. It's revealing text. So there's kind of a transition from one photo to the next. The logo appears. So that's an example, one thing that we cover in our After Effects Level 1 class. In our After Effects Level 2 class, we have a more complex animation here with more things moving around. We're animating type, doing quicker transitions here from like one thing to another, moving elements. So it can be animated pieces, it could be photography. In this case, it's an illustrative type animation, but there's lots of different things you can animate. So let's just watch that one more time here. So things moving around. So you're really thinking about how you're leading the eye through things and what things are you animating, where are people going to look. For video editing, such as Adobe Premiere, this is an example of things that have been put together. So things you're going to pay attention to is timing to the music, cuts from one angle to another, from one shot to another, speeding up of time, because maybe some things you don't want to watch in real time, you want to happen faster. So some things happen in real time, some things happen faster. Speed up, skip over a section, put some text overlay. So not so much animation really, but just putting different video clips together, going from one thing to the other. When this was being shot, of course, there was a lot more video shot, and we don't need all of that video. So it's really putting together just the parts that people need and like skipping over certain parts, speeding up time, and putting everything together so that you have a kind of compelling thing at the end. So putting all those video pieces that were shot into one final piece. So that's an example of some video editing that you would do in Adobe Premiere. So to get started with video editing, one thing I think that sometimes people think about is like, oh, well, how am I going to get started in video editing when I don't have stock stuff to play with? Like if you're going to start creating your own projects, you're like, where do I get video footage? There's not a lot of like free stock video footage out there. So of course you can pay for stuff, but also that might not be realistic because everything's like kind of perfectly cut and put together. So how could you get started like doing your own projects if somebody doesn't give you a project? Everybody has a smartphone pretty much these days. And believe it or not, your smartphone could be a lot better than you think at capturing video. So back with the iPhone 5S, this was years ago, one of the best films at the Sundance Film Festival was shot using an iPhone 5S. And that sucks compared to the one that you have currently probably in your pocket or that you might be watching on right now. So most of the latest phones can often shoot in 4K video. Not that you even need to shoot in 4K video because it sucks up a lot of space on your phone. You can often just capture at high definition, which is good enough. If you're watching it back on your phone anyway, you don't really need anything higher than high definition footage anyway. But you can often capture stuff on your phone, shoot it yourself, and then edit it together. So you don't have to have super expensive equipment. Could you buy a super expensive camera? Sure. You don't often need it though, just to get started with something. So think about different types of videos that you might be able to create, like a social media video. It doesn't have to be a super long thing. Don't think video editing is movies. You don't have to create a 2-hour movie for your first project. Most of the videos that I watch these days are something either on social media or on YouTube, which are much shorter. Yeah, sure, I still watch TV shows and movies, but probably the most amount of video that I watch is short little videos on social media. They could be a short little ad, they could be a social media promo, it could be a YouTube video, and often those can be short things that you could get started just doing something simply captured on your phone, and you can make up a little project for yourself. Make up some YouTube videos. You don't have to have super super expensive equipment. Probably the phone that's in your pocket is capable of shooting what you need so you can get started doing these projects yourself. So don't feel like, oh, I can't get into video editing because I can't afford a super expensive camera. You don't have to have it to get started. So we do have a motion graphics certificate here. If you want to learn more about motion graphics, in that motion graphics certificate, we teach you Premiere for doing video editing, both level of After Effects, because After Effects is a big program. It can do a lot of stuff. It's a very, very powerful program. Not the most intuitive program. It's one of the harder programs that Adobe makes to learn. So you do want to have some experience using at least Photoshop before coming into this program. So if you've never used an Adobe app, you would want to learn something like Photoshop just to get used to Adobe apps. And also Photoshop's going to be really useful anyway, because you will often design in Photoshop and then bring your designs into After Effects to animate them. You might also create something in Illustrator and bring that into After Effects as well. So knowing Photoshop and Illustrator are useful. We don't require it for this program in terms of that you have to take it with us. You certainly can learn those programs with us, but we do highly recommend that you know Photoshop or Illustrator or both before coming into this program. If you don't know any other Adobe app, it's going to be a little bit too much before coming into this one. So we do recommend that you know Photoshop or Illustrator, at least having some familiarity with the basics of those before you come in. So computer advice. So we're wrapping up here, getting closer to the end. Do you need a fancy computer, Mac or PC? We talked a little bit about this earlier when the question came up there. For the most part, if you have a somewhat recent Mac or PC, it will probably work. Now, if you have a really old Mac or PC that was made many, many years ago, depending on the computer, it might have issues running the software in terms of speed or compatibility. Now, I previously, before I upgraded to my latest laptop, I was using a 7-year-old 15-inch MacBook Pro. And actually, I have my current laptop. I did just recently upgrade to the 16-inch MacBook Pro, which is great. But I was using the 15-inch MacBook Pro from 2013. It's sitting on my desk right next to me right now. And that still runs all the latest macOS and all the latest Adobe software. And to be honest, it was okay. It was fine to use. And at this point, it's a 7-year-old battery, so the battery wasn't working so well on it, but I could have had that replaced if I wanted to. But it was doing still a pretty decent job. It could run all the latest macOS, all the latest Adobe software, and that's in a 7-year-old machine. Now, granted, that was a $3,000 laptop back then, but for $3,000, I got a computer that ran all the latest software for 7 solid years and ran it very well. So to me, that's a pretty good deal. That said, you don't have to buy the most expensive Mac or the most expensive PC to do most of this design work. If you're doing video is more demanding in terms of having a good graphics card for your computer and having a bunch of hard drive space, because video files take up a lot of space. But for the most part, any decent Mac or PC will work. You don't have to have the latest stuff. As we said before, most designers do use Macs. Some apps like Sketch and Final Cut Pro, which is a video editing app, those only work on a Mac, but most software works on Mac and PC these days and works very, very similarly. On the opposite side of things, PCs can run most of your design apps, and some apps like PowerPoint, like I mentioned earlier, PowerPoint's better on Windows than it is on a Mac, which is kind of funny because Microsoft bought a Mac-only program called PowerPoint. And yeah, they didn't make PowerPoint themselves. They bought it when it was a Mac-only program. And then they made it for Windows, and then they just made it better for Windows. So that's kind of funny. But today, PowerPoint's better on Windows. AutoCAD, even though they make a Mac program, I would not use the Mac version. Definitely use the PC version of that if you're going to do something like AutoCAD. If you're buying a new computer, if you're in the market for a new one, my biggest suggestion is make sure you get a solid state or flash memory. So solid state drives, those are much harder, much faster than a hard drive. So hard drives are these spinning platters that are in your computer, and they are more prone to failure, and they're just incredibly slow compared to an SSD or a solid state drive. Apple, what they'll do is they have something called a fusion drive on some of their computers where they fuse together some of the solid state and a hard drive, and they put them together so it looks to you like one hard drive, but it's kind of the best of both worlds. Solid state is fast, but it's really expensive. So most laptops these days have gone to just an SSD because they're much smaller and they're much faster, but you don't get a lot of storage space on it because it's really expensive. Hard drives, you get much bigger amounts of storage, but they're much slower. They're also physically bigger, so they're harder to fit into a laptop. So most laptops these days don't ship with hard drives. They ship with SSDs. If you're getting a desktop, like say an iMac or a Tower computer, whether it's Mac or PC, those bigger desktop machines, they often will go with the cheaper hard drives, but they're going to be much slower. So if you can get an SSD, a solid state drive, get the biggest one that you can afford, it's going to be much, much faster. If you're buying a Mac and you can't afford a solid SSD where it's SSD for the whole drive, if you're getting a desktop like an iMac, get the Fusion drive. Don't just get the regular hard drive, get a Fusion drive, because at least the Fusion drive gives you some of the speed of an SSD, and you still get a big hard drive because they actually also tack on a hard drive which is cheaper, and it gives you a bigger amount of storage. So get as much SSD for speed as you can. Also, if you're buying an external display, make sure you get a high-res monitor. Now, if you're getting an Apple product, let's say a laptop, I think all the laptops now are all high-res Retina displays. All the iMacs are, except I think the lowest iMac I think is still a non-Retina display. Apple calls them Retina displays. Everybody else calls them a high-res display. For example, a 4K monitor is a high-res display. Just make sure you get a high-res display because doing design, you want to see high-resolution graphics. So make sure you spend a little bit of extra money and get a high-resolution display. If you're doing video apps like After Effects and Premiere, those are going to be more demanding. While slower computers can run them, they're going to run them more slowly. And especially if you're doing a lot of video work, if you're dealing with higher resolution videos like 4K videos that your client provides, when you have a slower graphics card, you're going to really feel it. So some laptops, for example, will come with what's called integrated graphics, and an integrated graphics is not going to perform as well as a dedicated graphics card. So a dedicated graphics card is going to perform much better and be able to play your videos back. To wrap this up, our last main topic here is portfolios. I know we saw some portfolio websites, but let's take a look at a couple other designer portfolios because you're going to want to create your own work and put it together and present it as a portfolio. So let's take a look at some portfolio websites. So here, this is a very simply designed portfolio. They're letting the work speak for itself. And even if I just scroll through here, I see Facebook, Instagram, Nike. Yeah, he's doing some client dropping, right? And then Dropbox is in here. So New Balance. So right away, of course, he didn't start with like older brother. He didn't start with fiction. He started with the well-known companies. But you click on any one of these projects, and you take a look. It's beautifully presented with a little bit of information. I like that he shows some sketches here to see some of the ideas, that there's some animation in here kind of showing you some concepts. And this is kind of neat that he did a walkthrough to kind of illustrate, hey, this is what I did. Look at the animation. Look at the experience of what this is like. Some people just put static things, but they're not as compelling as showing some stuff like this. And yeah, so just a nicely arranged layout, all very attractive work. And then when I get to the very bottom, if I get all the way to the bottom, then it goes to the next project. So it just leads me right in to the next project so I can keep going through and reviewing the work so that I don't have to go back unless I want to. So very clean, nice work that's in there, cleanly presented, easy to flow through and look at different projects. Usability is an important thing. You want to have a clean website that's easy for somebody to navigate, nice big examples for people to really be able to see the quality of your work. You click on a project, it loads up. Sometimes you can read more about the project, see just beautiful big visuals. I want to see as much detail as possible when looking at an example. Let me go down all the way to the bottom, and just in case I get to the bottom, what do I see next? Down below here at the bottom, here are more projects. So I can go into any of the other projects so I don't have to go back to the previous page. So I can click on the next project, and again, it just keeps leading me through one project to another so I can review the work easily. If somebody's going to be hiring you for a job, you want to make it easy for them to review your work. It's annoying when somebody comes up with some funky way for presenting their work and it's hard to navigate because somebody that's reviewing you for a job might be looking at 100 or 200 candidates, and you want to make sure that it's easy for them to navigate your work. In this case, I just have to scroll. This is super easy. There's no real user experience here other than just scrolling. I don't have to click on anything. I don't have to do any sort of figuring out of anything. It's just huge, big examples of the work and just doesn't even say anything, just shows beautiful examples, and it's really attractive. Definitely good quality work that's here. Quite nice. And so sometimes it doesn't have to be a super complex website. Just scroll through the work. Yeah. And then down at the bottom is an email and social media. So it can be very simply presented if the work stands on its own. Here, this is a beautiful illustration right from the start here. It's actually a little slideshow here that goes through some, ooh, that's pretty neat. Little video there. Some nice examples there. And then you can get down to the portfolio here. Ooh, neat little hover there. A little hover animation there. Click on one of those projects. Opens up that particular project so you can see more about that particular project. And then, oh look, it's easy to get to another project. You click on that. So make it easy to move through your projects. Show your best work. It's quality over quantity. I want to see good work rather than tons of work. If I see 50% of your projects not being good, I think half the time you're not very good. I'd rather see only the good half and cut out the bad half. So I can click on any one of these projects to read more. Now this is a studio that's showing projects they did for clients, hoping that they're going to get other clients. So they're doing more of a client-centric approach, saying this is what we did for this client. We did this, and they're going to explain more about the process because the hope is that you're going to be a client wanting to hire the studio to do your project. So they're not trying to get a job at a studio. They are a studio. They're trying to get clients. And finally, one more just to show one other example here. So these are different projects that this company has done, or this designer, sorry. And so you can look at one of these and scroll through to see the other ones if you want to. But if you click on it, you can actually go there and learn more about it. I like that they show the mobile phone, the desktop, so you can see how both of those work. Nice big examples. Mixing it up with some photography and then some more kind of frontal, normal kind of appearances here. And then a little more photography. Talking about some of the things that they did, as well as showing the visuals. Nice big visuals, so it's easy for me to see. I showed included some demo reels here. So if you want to watch those, feel free to watch those for After Effects and video editing. But my final thoughts, just to wrap this up, is when you're first getting started, you need to design. Do as much practice as you can. It's going to help you to get better at the apps that you need to use. You're going to practice those apps and get better at them. The more designs you create, the better you're going to get at creating new designs and improving the quality of your designs. So practice a lot. And the reason we like doing design is because for a lot of us, we enjoy it. So have fun when you're first getting started. Enjoy what it is that you're doing. Set aside time every single day to do a little bit of design. Keep it fun. Choose projects that are interesting for you to experiment with and to put into your portfolio. And if you want to learn more, we have certificate programs and classes that you can check out on all of these different types of designs. But just want to thank everybody for coming today and to stay safe out there, and hope everything's going well with all of you. We will be posting this onto our blog and our YouTube channel for you guys to review in the future. So hopefully we'll see you on a future seminar or maybe in one of our classes. We're doing all of our classes live online. They're all interactive sessions if you're taking it online. So when we are allowed to open back up, we will return to doing in-person classes as well as online. Even before this coronavirus time lockdown started, we had been doing online classes as well. Now we've just transitioned to doing everything online. All of our classes that we do that are online classes are all live interactive classes. So we do screen shares. If students have problems, they can screen share so we can see what they're doing. And so it's an interactive way of learning. It's not sitting back just watching videos. There's a live instructor for each class, and you can talk to them either through the chat or through speaking through your microphone. So they're live, interactive classes. So if you want some way to spend your time and learn a new skill, hopefully you would consider one of our classes. And just want to again thank everybody and stay safe, and hope you have some fun learning the type of design that you're most interested in.